Thank you. I got these from a thrift store. I think they're from the book Don Quixote, the three travelers. So they're each one represents like one of the travelers. Hi. All right. So I'm just gonna give it a couple more minutes. I'm gonna today's session, Is It True? Tales from the Magic City, is going to be really interesting. I was actually really excited to research a little bit into this topic because usually in the archives we deal with, things that are based on documents and pictures and facts, correspondence. But this one, it's actually kind of a little bit of myth, a legend. So I'm really excited to explore into it, and I hope you guys like the presentation. I'm just gonna give it 2 more minutes and then we'll start. Also, in my free time, I've been painting. So I actually created this for the series. It's supposed to come out like kind of like an ombre, but trying. But it says, "Is it true? Tales from the Magic City," and you have palm trees and a rooster because roosters and chickens are everywhere. All right, so I'm gonna get started. So today's session, is it true? Tales from the Magic City. Is it true that a black pirate named Caesar sailed around the Florida Keys and has buried treasure there? So let's get into this legend. Actually, we're so excited for this because this legend has been passed down, it seems, through oral histories, and there's no actual evidence that can record the actual existence of Black Caesar, but there are a lot of oral histories and a lot of interesting things that make you think, hey, maybe it is real. So let's get started. So the legend of Black Caesar has to deal with an 18th century pirate who was actually born in the late 17th century. And it starts off with him actually being, there's different versions of how he became a pirate and how it came to be. So the main thing is that this man, he was an African tribal war chief. He was living in Africa, and at that time, that was during the height of colonization and the slave trade. And it seems there's different account whether he was tricked or captured into slavery, but one account says that he was meeting a trail sales goodsman, and the salesman told him, "Hey, why don't you come onto my ship? If you come into my ship, I have a lot of things that you can buy or trade. Look at these gold watches, look at these silks, look at all these different goods that I have. But if you come to my ship, I have so much more." And apparently Caesar, he agreed, but he said like, "Hey, I'm gonna bring my men with me just in case of anything." So while he was on the ship, the salesman, he gave him food, he gave him liquor, he had entertainment, he had people dancing, he had music, and without Caesar's knowing it, he actually signaled to his crewmen to slowly lift up the anchor, and that's when the ship began to sail away. And by the time Caesar noticed, it was too late. So Caesar was now on his way to the New World, captured as a slave. So I actually have a couple questions. Who knows the name of this journey with millions of Africans that were stolen from Africa, boarded upon the ship to be brought to the New World? Does anybody know the name of this passage or this voyage? All right. Let's see. Let me give it a couple minutes or a couple seconds. So this voyage was actually called the Middle Passageway, and approximately, let me see, I have my statistic, approximately 11 million slaves were brought over to the New World, and approximately, let me see, 11 million slaves were brought over to the New World. And does anybody know how many of them died on the voyage here? So approximately 2 million Africans died on the voyage to the New World, and most of the slaves were actually not brought to the United States. They were actually brought to Brazil. And so according to this legend, Black Caesar was one of those 11 million slaves that was making his trek on the way to the New World. And during his journey, he actually refused to eat. He refused to move, but he was actually befriended by one of the crew members on the board the ship, and he convinced Caesar to eat, and they became acquaintances, and they became fast friends. And as the ship was nearing the Florida coast in order to dock at a slave port, it seems that there was a hurricane approaching. And once the hurricane started approaching, it was apparent that the ship was not going to make it. It was gonna start crashing in the coral reefs. So what happened was the friend that Caesar befriended actually freed him, and they actually were able to jump on a longboat, one of those smaller boats, and actually sail to shore. And apparently they were the only survivors of that ship. And over the years, what they started doing, they started actually that's how he became a pirate. That's how they started seeing other ships that would pass by. They would act like they would be in distress, and once they got close to the other ship, they'd actually take out their weapons and gun and demanded them to give them all their supplies and all their ammunitions. And there are actually very different versions of the story. Some say that Caesar was an African slave, but he did not come directly from Africa. He was actually from Haiti. He was a Haitian rebel that decided to escape during the time of colonization, and that's how he became a pirate. But yeah, and once he started ransacking and pirating off with his other friend, that's how they started accumulating wealth, and that's how the legend of Caesar began. And let's see. All right. So I have a question. Does anyone know who was the major exporter of slave? What country exported slave during the slave trade? Which was like the #1 country that exported the most slaves? Does anybody know? It was Portugal. Portugal was actually Portugal, Mr. Braynon. Portugal dominated the slave trade for the first 200 years, and it was then followed by Spain and France. So yes. All right. So let's get back to the tale of Black Caesar. So like I said, he started pirating, and eventually he started recruiting other members, other people who wanted to join that lifestyle. And a lot of people say, why didn't he try to go back to Africa? Why did he decide to become a slave? Why didn't he settle somewhere else? Well, it was because, what were the other options? If he decided to go any other places in the United States during that time, it was under British rule, he would have automatically become a slave in one of the southern plantations. And if you go to anywhere else in the Caribbean and Latin America, his option would have been the same. So for a lot of runaway slaves, a lot of people who were indentured servants decided to join this lifestyle because there was no other option. This was their freedom. And imagine trying to sail thousands of miles back to Africa. So he and his friends decided to, become pirates and take what's theirs. And so the way that they started capturing other ships and started raiding other ships, like I said, they would pretend that they would be in distress in this small little longboat, and what they would do was they would climb up, or they would demand them to give them all the supplies and ammunition and food, and they would even take prisoners, women, children, anybody, and they would take them back. And let's say if somebody was trying to get them or follow them back, they would hide in one of those smaller keys around Key West. So what they would do is they would use a metal ring, embed it in a rock. They ran a strong rope through a ring heeled over the boat and hid it underwater, and they waited until the danger passed. I don't know if you've ever seen Pirates of the Caribbean, where they would flip over the boat and they would have weights tying it down in order to hide it from patrolling crews. So the kind of would do the same thing, and that's how they would do. That's how they would hide, and they would navigate through the Florida Keys, like the mangroves, and they knew that it would not be passable through the larger ships. And they would actually wait it out. And it's rumored that Black Caesar, he had 26 bars of gold and silver on the island. And it is also said that Black Caesar had a camp of prisoners and had a harem of women, which means he had multiple concubines on the island. And at times when he would go raid, he would actually leave without leaving them supplies like food or water, and that's just basically to assure themselves they couldn't really run away. And they are saying that, you know, unfortunately some people did die, and because of he did have harem of women, there were a lot of children born on the island, and some of them did manage to escape. And those children that escaped actually started living off the other smaller keys. And it's said that they invented their own language, customs, and to this day, it says that there are children spirits who haunt Caesar's Rock, and these are the children of Caesar the pirate. So yeah, so I thought that was pretty interesting. All right. Another interesting thing about this, the legend of Black Caesar, is that there's actually a connection with him and Blackbeard, the famous Blackbeard pirate that sailed, the oceans on the Queen's Anne Revenge. He was also known as Edward Teach. Edward Teach, who is also known as Blackbeard, is actually based on a real person. You know, this person, there's document that he existed, that he died, that he was born, everything. So this person is real. So my thing is, if, you know, a lot of this person was real, and this person, if I'm not mistaken, he was actually a sailor from the British Royal Armed Forces who kind of, deserted his post and decided to do pirating. But this person who has English descent, who's white, who has documentation, but imagine a slave from Africa. There was never any documentation of any records of, you know, birth certificate, even travel ships document inventory. Since they were slaves, they were not put as a person, they were put as an item, as property, so they wouldn't be recorded. So I think there's a really big chance that Black Caesar did exist. It's just there's no surviving records because there was none to begin with at all. And there's also things like this, you know, so Caesar's Rock, the legend of Black Caesar, is that he floated around the Florida Biscayne Bay. And if you go to the bottom of the Biscayne National Park, that's where Caesar's Rock is located. And there's also a little creek channel called Caesar's Creek. And, you know, for it to be named after Black Caesar, I've learned as my time as an archivist at the Black Archives that a lot of these oral histories are based on actual stories. Yes. Okay. So, I don't know how to do that. I'm seeing, sorry, I'm supposed to pin something, but I don't know how to do that, but I'm going to figure it out. But, let me see. Okay. Got it. Yay. All right. The legend of Black Caesar has him roaming Biscayne Bay, having a colony and a settlement in that area. And I found a couple of pictures. These are all artist interpretations of what Black Caesar looked like. You know, they have him as a tall man. It's noted in the legend that he was twice the size of any average man, noted for his strength, noted for his intelligence, his cunningness, everything. And this is one of the interpretations of Black Caesars. And this is actually, it's not that great, but this is actually where Caesar's Rock and Caesar's Channel is located. If you're familiar with Biscayne National Park, you know that those consist of the Upper Keys. And around here is where Caesar's Rock. So you can imagine how it was. And if you ever been to any of the national parks, if you ever been to the Everglades, you know how impenetrable those Florida mangroves can be, and how easy it is to like not see something or hide from it. So it is totally plausible that somebody, a pirate, could have settled there and hit 26 bars of gold. And if you're a treasure hunter and you have a knack for looking for treasure, just know that it's estimated to worth $2 million. $2 million. And now I also want to talk about how he's represented in different folk tales and legend. Sometimes they painted him as, you know, the slave who was never really a slave, the person who managed to escape and make his own destiny. But then you also have different iteration depending who's telling the tale of Black Caesar. For example, I found an early 20th century from like the 1910s, 1915 newspaper article from the Miami Herald, Miami Times, actually the Miami Metropolis, that tells the story of Black Caesar, but they actually depict him as, you know, what a lot of these early American white literate stories depict Black men as a savage man who would kidnap white women, force them into slavery, who would terrorize, you know, the humble people living on shores, and, you know, who would catch this havoc, you know, cause this havoc, and basically just be this ungodly person who was only there just to cause pain and harm and did not care about anybody else. But then you have to go back to the story, like who's telling the story. And they usually have this, you know, the person who's also prisoner is somebody who's a white female who's in distress, who's looking for somebody to save her. And always person who's somebody to save her from Black Caesar is this authoritarian white figure who comes and defeat Black Caesar and save her from all this barbaric lifestyle. So I thought that was really interesting as well. And I also found during my research that there's a tale of Black Caesar not only in the Caribbean but other different parts of the world where colonization was happening. For example, in Australia, there's his own version of Black Caesar. And as you know, Australia was a British colony and they also imported slaves. And here you see a man who escaped his destiny for becoming a slave, who is now sailing around the Australian coast and basically mirrors the same thing as Black Caesar in the Florida coast. And there's also another different version of this story where there's actually kind of like two Black Caesar. There's Black Caesar who sailed in the Florida coast, and there's also a Black Caesar who escaped slavery in a plantation in North Carolina. And so I got a comment that says, unfortunately, that fear factor still exists today. It definitely does. Last week during Jeopardy Noir, one of the questions was who was persecuted or who was killed because a white woman who lied. And that's basically, you have the story of Emmett Till. People, you know, does that make it sound like folklore? So that fear factor, I'm not quite getting that question, so that does make it sound like folklore. I don't think it makes it sound like folklore, but I think to the general white American public, it might make it sound like folklore. And as I've learned during research, a lot of these oral histories that consist are based on reality. For example, a couple years back, we were doing research on the Black medical field in Miami, the Black South Florida medical field, and there was always the story of a Dr. Rivers who came to Miami, who was the first Black doctor. And this was based on all oral history, no real physical evidence account. However, while I was starting to do research for it, we actually found that there was a Black, there was actually a Black doctor named Dr. Rivers, but he actually did exist. He was in Miami, but it was just a couple of years later. He was not the first Black doctor, but he was a Black doctor in Miami. And so I have another comment saying having that many Black Caesar. Okay, so does that make it folklore, having many that Black Caesar? I think what makes it folklore in the eyes of a reader or a historian is because there's no hard evidence or there's not proof, because traditionally, especially educational institutions are taught to, you know, base everything on facts, something that can be proven, if there are written documents, if there are supporting evidence. But as we know, history, stories are not preserved like that, especially when it comes to Black communities, minority communities, even the communities of indigenous. Is not based on physical evidence, because a lot of our stories are passed down orally and they are real. It's just that normal institutions don't classify them as real. But I also think there are a lot of versions to the Black Caesar stories, because there's this person who, like, millions of Africans were taken from the homeland and they're forced into slavery. But all of a sudden you see this one person who resisted that destiny, who made his own life and actually, managed to mount wealth, who managed to set his own rules, who managed to do what he wanted, and also be that face of defiance, that face of hope, that face of, of liberty. So I also think that's why there's so many different versions of Black Caesar. And Caesar can also be, like, the name Caesar can also derive from, Greek mythology, Caesar, a king, an emperor. So I think that's also why, like, there might be a couple influence why this name was allocated to him. And according to legend, just kind of to wrap it up, because I know I'm going on a little bit too long before time is up. So according to legend, when Blackbeard was captured, at that time, Black Caesar was part of his crew member. And after Blackbeard was captured, Black Caesar, under the instruction of Blackbeard, was set to designate gunpowder and basically destroy the British militia that captured him. But unfortunately, Black Caesar was stopped. He was captured. And he was captured and he was put to death. So let's see. Give me a second. Let me just go over some of the things. So Blackbeard was captured and convicted of piracy and hanged in Williamsburg, Virginia. And at that time, he was hanged under the British rule. And that basically ended the legend of Black Caesar. But I think it's so interesting how there's so many specific details, places, locations, and even some people that he interacted that, for me, this oral history, I tend to go over, hey, maybe he did exist, and maybe not in the exact same order or these exact same details, but he probably did existed. And for now, I actually have a couple of things that I want to show you guys and talk to you about. All right. So, just to kind of transition a little bit over, I actually have a couple of jokes. They're kind of puns. Okay. So, what did the ocean say to the pirate? Does anybody want to answer my joke? So the joke was, what did the ocean say to the pirate? Alright. I'm going to answer it. It says nothing, it just waved. It's a little punny, but I thought it was funny. But yeah, so that is the legend of Black Caesar. I also thought it was really interesting to see how, how there are so many different legends and stories that correlate with the transatlantic slave trade. And I also want to just talk about, how it was, how it impacted, not only the United States, but just places all over the world. And how sometimes it gets lost. A lot of people think about slavery and plantations, but there's so many stories that involve that voyage here. And an interesting collection that we have at the Black Archives that it's available to viewing once it reopens. It is the Juneteenth collection, and also Mr. Tinley. Mr. Tinley who is the chair of the Virginia Key Beach Trust. He actually does a commemoration every June 19th to honor those who passed away during the voyage of the transatlantic slave trade. And there are photos at the Black Archives house in that collection where you see Mr. Tinley. He's actually Gene Tinley. Who actually is leaving roses and some homemade wreaths and does a ceremony in order to honor those who unfortunately perished during that time. All right. Let's see. Let me see. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions about Black Caesar? And I also want you to let you know that the Florida Keys is in really close proximity to the Bahamas, and there's always been a big Bahamian settlement and presence there in the Bahamas, and these stories are kept alive within the community, the Florida Keys communities. And even though this is not a tale from the Magic City, it's still a tale from South Florida, and where the Black Archives History and Research Foundation of South Florida. So we want to preserve this history, and eventually one day we'll be able to find sufficient evidence to prove that this person did exist, or some type of different versions. Okay, so I have a question. So how did you find these stories on Black Caesar? So for this story, for this segment, usually I actually did not go to the archives. I relied specifically on the internet. So unfortunately at the archives, since there are no physical evidence of his existence, we don't have anything of Black Caesar, but it's something that I've always heard over time. And so I started doing a lot of research. I went to a lot of different websites, National Geographic, and I'm going to work to put up some of the links so you guys can look into it. And if you just Google Black Caesar pirate, you're going to see a lot of different websites with hundreds of versions, different stories of this story, and you can learn something new. And also, if you want to go treasure hunting once this is over and try to find, Black Caesar's treasure, you can do so. Let us know if you find anything. And yeah, so I basically used the internet, and it gave me a lot of great different variation. Also, if you go to YouTube, you can see a lot of different videos that people have done over Black Caesar. Yeah. Alrighty then. So thank you for joining me today. This is It True? Hold on, let me lift it up. Okay. Is It True? Tales from Magic City. And until next time, thank you for joining us. We have a couple of recommendations, but if you want me to discuss a specific story or tale, please drop a comment below. Let us know what to please let me know if you want me to do research or anything else. So Miami Gardens now says, I'm not letting anyone know if I find anything. Hey, that's the right way, especially nowadays. But maybe if you just say, hey, Black Caesar is real, I know. We appreciate it. And tomorrow, tune in tomorrow for Black Miami. Brain fart. So tune in tomorrow with Alicia Milton for tomorrow's segment, and then we also have the other segment the rest of the week. And if you want me to go over anything, please let me know. Bye.